So the report by Freudenberg is, again, a review paper. So this means he looked at research that other folks did and sort of tried to pull it all together and give a summary of everyone's results. And so here's the cover page from that. So we got the same questions of, who funded, where's this guy coming from, what's going on. Well, I don't know who funded it. It's academic research. When I did research, at the bottom it would say supported by DOE or something like that. There's no such tagline on the paper. And also the papers he's reviewing are also all published in academic journals. So this is published in an academic journal. It's a peer-reviewed publication. It means at least had to go through a series of reviewers, so some of the political biases should hopefully get smoothed out by that process. Again, it probably did not take a lot of money to support the study, but I don't know where it came from. He himself at the time was at University of Wisconsin. He's now at Santa Barbara, where he's the Delson Professor of Environmental Studies at UCSB. He's a well-respected researcher in this field, and actually he's been publishing for 20, 30 years. And actually, when I come to a publication at the end that draws heavily on his work, when Jeffrey Jacquet did his work. And what, again, he did was review other studies. He didn't go out there and measure economic results. He went out there and combed the literature for everyone who had done studies of an area and said, okay, I want to look at what's the big picture. Okay, and so to make it into his review, several things had to be true. First, there had to be enough comparative data, either, again, different locations or one spot over time, or both, one spot over time and different locations, so that he felt that it was a reasonable long-term picture. We're not going to look at just a few years. Part of the reason for that is that a number of studies done in the 1970s, right when we're having a huge energy boom, found amazingly positive results. And as we'll see a little bit later, that in part was what we did. We have a huge energy boom for about 10 years. The long-term picture is different. They also had to give numbers. They couldn't just say, oh, we thought it was better, we thought it was worse. It had to be a quantitative assessment. They needed to assess at least one of the measures he wanted to look at. These are the standard, economic indicators of either income level, unemployment rate, or poverty rate. So those are kind of the big three that economists tend to look at. And finally, he wanted to look at predominantly rural areas. And the reason for the last one is that basically he wanted not to have the picture clouded by a big metropolitan area. So they wanted to look at rural areas. And we'll see that's a pretty big restriction that we'll get to again at the end. So here's what he found. And this is what really jumped out at me and made me say at least people ought to know about this and decide and start looking harder at this question, that it's not all going to be roses like Penn State is saying. That in general, if you look at resource extraction, again, that means mining of metals, mining of things like coal, and mining of gas and oil, that the unfavorable outcomes outnumber the favorable ones. That by and large, you're more likely to be worse off than better off in the long run if you pursue resource extraction as your economic development strategy. The size of the study area is not defined. I think that it was anywhere from a county to something like a community. I don't know the 19 studies he wound up using for exactly. He called them cases. He has 301 cases from 19 different studies. I don't know the size of the areas.
If you use resource recovery as...
Yeah, if a community tries to pin hopes on energy extraction as their development strategy, that's more like what these cases are like. That is exactly what the guys in Penn State and Broome County are saying we ought to do. I don't know why they would, because you know what? It looks like it's not such a good deal.
Wouldn't it just be an additive to what you do? Couldn't you do that?
We'll get to that. I think that that's the whole point with the negative impacts, and let's save that for the end, because I want to get through this part, because those are good questions, and that's the crux of the matter. Is it additive or is it not? So this is what's telling us it may not be additive. A community was looked at either over time, or similar communities, one that had more resource extraction and one that had less resource extraction, were compared to each other. And in terms of income, poverty, and employment, the favorable outcomes, the favorable outcome in income means income actually went up, maybe in this community that had more resource extraction compared to this one over here. That happened in, pardon?
But that's average.
That's average income.
Those who got a lot.
Include those who got a lot and those who didn't. On average, in more than half the cases, things didn't get better income-wise when there was a lot of mining going on, even with the extra income from the mining.
How did this play out over time? Especially the income level, was that at the time when industry was developed, and how did this look 10 years later?
Right. So these studies are divided up by time at one point in here. This is the net over about from the 1970s through early 2000. If you look at studies that were completed in the early 80s, they show much more favorable income answers because there was indeed a huge boost in revenue and income due to oil and gas at that time. But if you look at the longer picture, studies after the early 80s actually are even worse than the results here, because what I have here is I've mixed all of the results together. It's a summary result. So this is saying that more of the favorable outcomes happened through the early 1980s. Fewer of the favorable outcomes happened in the late 80s to 90s. But here's the net, if you look at all those studies. Of the 301 different cases he looked at, less than half, about 47.5% of those 301 different situations, did the income levels go up as a result of resource extraction. And the poverty rate went down in only 1/5 of the cases, and the unemployment went down in only about 1/6 of the cases. So in way more cases than not, your unemployment rate was actually worse in the communities that were following mining as a major activity.
You said this was about 300 cases?
Yeah, 301 different cases. So there are 19 different papers or studies, and then they would look at maybe a bunch of different areas, so it all adds up to about 301 cases.
So were those controlled for the general economic income unemployment trends nationally or at least regionally?
That's the whole point of the comparative study. So either it's going to look across, at this community and that community, both of them tracking over time. So the answer is yes for those studies that are looking at comparable communities at an instant time. I don't know for sure what's done in terms of one community that was tracked over time as to how much they looked at compared to the national trends. For that, you have to go back to the individual study, and I'm looking at this, which is, of course, the overview. So we have to assume that the guy who did the original study, which went through peer review, properly took that into account, and the guy who did the review study, which went through peer review, properly took that into account. I'm not an economist. I did not read the original studies. I read the report on the studies. Okay.